So starting semester 2, we're going to really focus in on geometry. And where we're going to start today with geometry is parallel and perpendicular lines. So it's a little bit like algebra because we're not really graphing a whole lot of stuff yet, but a lot of this information comes vitally important when we are doing graphing and looking further in geometry down the line. So it's a good segue, though, I think, between algebra and geometry. So a lot of you guys might already know what parallel lines and perpendicular lines are, but just for the sake of having it in the video, let's define some things. So let me see. Can I set this up so I can write a little easier? I don't know. Okay. Parallel. So parallel lines are lines that never intersect. Lines that never intersect. And a note that's interesting about these is that they have the same slope, but different y-intercepts. Okay. Now, perpendicular lines, and I'm actually going to do a little abbreviation here. So parallel lines you're going to see as this. You're going to see two little bars look like L's to indicate parallel lines, because parallel lines, in a sense, are two lines that, same slope but never intersect. So two lines that will never cross each other, something like that. So this little notation does, parallel. Perpendicular is going to be denoted like this, kind of like an upside down T. There we go. All right. So perpendicular. These lines intersect at a 90-degree angle. Lines intersect at 90-degree angle. So kind of like a plus sign or something. Like these lines right here are perpendicular, where they form a 90-degree angle. Now, what's very interesting about these, a good note to make, is these lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. So they have opposite reciprocal. I always mess up spelling this word. Reciprocal. Slopes. Now, what does that mean? What does opposite reciprocal slopes mean? Okay. Well, here's what we got. Okay, so let me write this down. Let's just make a side note of this. Opposite reciprocal. Oh gosh, I'm already spelling it wrong. Okay. Reciprocal. All right. Here's what it means. Let's say I give you a slope, right? That's what did I put on my paper? 3 fifths. Okay. Right? The opposite reciprocal of that. Okay, opposite means that since this is positive, the new number will be negative. Opposite meaning kind of the opposite in plus or minus. Reciprocal meaning flippy floppy nature of the fraction. So we're going to flip it over, 5 on top, 3 on bottom. So the opposite reciprocal of 3 fifths would be negative 5 thirds. So you're making a positive number now a negative number, and you're flipping the fraction as well. So let me just practice this a little bit to make sure we really understand what it is. All right, what about, I'll give you another example. What about 1/4? What's the opposite reciprocal of that? Well, opposite, because it's positive, means the opposite would be negative. And then flip the fraction. So 4 on top, 1 on bottom. So negative 4 over 1. However, this is actually the same thing as just negative 4, right? Because negative 4 over 1 is negative 4. So negative 4 is the opposite reciprocal of 1/4. Let's try negative 2, right? What's the opposite reciprocal of negative 2? Well, it's negative, so the opposite reciprocal will be positive. It'll be a positive number. Now think of negative 2 as negative 2 over 1. So it would be a positive, and then flip the fraction, 1 over 2. So the opposite reciprocal of negative 2 is 1/2. Okay, because a negative went to positive. It went from a negative 2 to a positive 1/2. And the fraction flipped it. Negative 2 is the same as 2 over 1. When you flip that over, it's 1 over 2, right? It's 1/2. Let's do a few more just to kind of let it sink in a bit. 8 over 5, right? 8 fifths. The opposite reciprocal of that would be a negative 5/8. right? Change the sign and flip the fraction. Here's a good one. Opposite reciprocal of -1. Opposite reciprocal of -1 is +1. Why is that? Because if you make it a fraction, -1/1, you change it, obviously the negative becomes positive, and then 1/1, when you flip it, it's still 1/1. So the opposite reciprocal is just from -1 now to +1. And then last one we'll do just for good practice, opposite reciprocal of 1/7. So 1/7, the opposite reciprocal will be a negative, because it's positive now, so we'll make it negative 7/1. But again, this is similar to the second problem we did. 7/1 is the same thing as just 7, right? So same thing as -7. Okay, so or -7, just to make it the same as the second one we did. All right, that's what opposite reciprocal means, and that's going to be something that we are going to need to know for what's coming up. So now let's do some problems real quick. I want to test your knowledge a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to ask you. Let's write an equation. Okay, of a line that is parallel to the given. Okay, so I'm going to give you some problems here. Let's do example A. So my equation is y equals 2x plus 7. So I want you to write an equation that's parallel to it, right? What would be parallel to this? Well, remember, parallel lines, we mentioned earlier, have the same slope but different y-intercepts. So a parallel line of this could be y equals 2x plus 8, right? They have the same slope. Both lines would have a slope of 2, but they have a different y-intercept, right? The first one had 7, the second one had 8. Now, I chose 8 just because it was different. But that would be the same as 2x plus 6. That's still going to be parallel. 2x plus 5, right? That's still going to be parallel. As long as it has the same slope, but a different y-intercept, it will be parallel. So there's more than one correct line you can write here, right? But the main thing is I want you to understand that the slope's the same. That's the key thing about this. So let's try another example. Let's say, what's a parallel line to y equals 3/4 x plus 10? Okay, well, a parallel line to that, again, has to have the same slope, but a different y-intercept. So y equals 3/4 x minus 10. Why not? That's a different, right? That's a different y-intercept. Same slope. Slope is still 3/4, but it has a different y-intercept, right? Again, there's more than one answer here. As long as you don't put plus 10, you're correct. You can say 3/4 x plus 9. You can say 3/4 x plus 19, right? You can say 3/4 x minus 10. As long as it's different than the original, it's parallel. And you have to make sure the slope's the same. That's very important. So here's another one. We'll do 2 more of these, just again, good practice. So -1/4 x minus 5. A line that would be parallel to that. Remember, same slope, so it would have to be -1/4 x as well. And then let's say plus 1, right? Just something different, a different y-intercept than -5. So again, same slope, -1/4, but a different y-intercept, and it's parallel. And we'll just do one more. So y equals -5x minus 12. So parallel would have the same slope, so -5x, but a different y-intercept. So let's say the y-intercept is -8, right? Instead of -12. Different y-intercept. There you go. These lines would all be parallel to their original counterpart, right? Because they have the same slope, 2, 3/4, -1/4, -1/4, right? -5, -5. Same slope, but different y-intercepts. But let me add one level of difficulty to this for you, okay? So let's try our next set of problems. Write an equation that is parallel to the given, and here's my next bit of difficulty, and goes through the given point. Okay, so we're adding a little bit more specification. It has to go through a certain point. So let me give you an example, right? So let's start with the equation y equals 3x plus 5. I want to write an equation that's parallel to this one. But, it has to go through, and the point that's given here is the point 1, 2. Okay? All right, so I want to write an equation that's parallel to this one, but it has to go through this point, 1, 2. So I can't just make up any equation I want like I did in these 4 problems here, right? I have to make sure I have the exact correct equation that would go through this point. So, I mean, I could, for example, say y equals 3x plus 4, but how do I know that this is what goes through the point 1, 2? I don't, right? I know the slope has to be the same. I know my slope has to be 3x. But my y-intercept is very important here because I have to make sure it's the correct number of the correct equation that will go through this point. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use the clues that we know. We know that our equation, right, will have the same slope. We know that its slope is going to be 3 because the original equation is 3 and it's parallel, right? Parallel, same slope. So I know that. But I don't know where the y-intercept is going to be. That's the most important part. But I know the slope is going to be 3, and I know it has to go through this point, meaning it has to go through 1 for the x, 2 for the y. I know I can use that as a helpful pair, as a helpful combination. So let's plug those numbers in, actually. Let's use this in this equation. Let's build it, and let's try and find out what the correct y-intercept would be. So when I plug these numbers in, I'm going to plug the 2 in for the y. So it's going to be 2 in for the y. And I'm going to plug, I got 3 for slope, because remember, we already know the slope's supposed to be 3. I'm going to plug the 1 in for the x. So remember, I'm plugging that 2 in for the y, the 1 in for the x. All right. Now, I'm not plugging anything in for b because my goal is to figure out, solve for b. What is b? What is our y-intercept? So let's do the math here and let's figure this out. So if I solve this, this is 2 equals, 3 times 1 makes 3. So that's 3 plus b. So now I'm solving for b. I'm going to subtract 3 to cancel it out. Do this on both sides. So this is negative 1 equals b. So there you go. The correct y-intercept is negative 1. So that means that my answer will be the equation y equals 3x minus 1. So contrary to what these 4 were, remember up here, these 4 problems, I could choose any y-intercept I wanted because I was just looking for a line that was parallel in general. But here I'm looking for a line that's parallel but goes through a specific point. That's only going to be one equation that does that. So I have to make sure I write the correct equation. So my y-intercept obviously can't be whatever it wants. It has to be the correct number to make the correct equation. And so this is how we're going to do it, right? We're going to use our slope because we already know that's supposed to be the same. And then we're going to use the x and y from the point that it gave us in order to find the correct y-intercept. And then I can write my equation all over again. I know my slope would still be 3, but after doing the math, I know that my y-intercept was negative 1. And now I have my full equation. So let's try another example. Let's try example B. So let's write an equation that's parallel to y equals 3/4 x plus 2. And it goes through the point 4, negative 2. All right. So remember, I know that my answer, right, has to have the same slope. I know my answer has to be y equals 3/4 x plus something, plus the y-intercept. That's the part I don't know. I know the slope has to be the same, so I know the slope is going to be 3/4. Now, to find the correct y-intercept of our equation, we're going to use the point it gave us. It wants us to go through this point, 4, negative 2. So I'm going to plug the 4 in for the x and the negative 2 in for the y, and we're going to solve. So when I do this, the negative 2 for the y, so it's negative 2 equal to 3/4 times x. I'm plugging in the 4 for the x, and then plus b. I don't know what b is. I'm trying to figure that out. So when I solve this, okay, negative 2 equals 3/4 times 4. In class, I showed you how to do this. This is simply just 3, right? Because the 4 and the 4 cancel out. So it's just 3 plus b. So now let's subtract 3 to cancel it out on both sides. This is negative 5 equal to b. So there you go. Now I know what the correct y-intercept is, so now I can write my actual equation. My actual equation would be y equals 3/4 x minus 5. Remember, same slope, so 3/4. I know the slope's the same, but after doing the math, after plugging in the numbers, I got -5 as the y-intercept. So that's the correct y-intercept for my equation. All right, let's try a couple more. Example C. So y equals -1/2 x minus 1. And then the point of interest here that has to go through is 2, -4. All right. So remember, I know that my equation and my answer will have to have the same slope. My slope, again, since the slope originally is -1/2, my equation will have to be -1/2 as well, x. Plus b, but I don't know the y-intercept. So again, same idea, right? We know the slope's the same. We have this x and this y. We're going to use that x and this y to find the b. So plug in the y, plug in the x. So this would be -4 equal to -1/2 times 2, and plugging in that 2 is my x, then plus b, solving for b. So when I do the math here, -4 equals -1/2 times 2 is simply just -1. Those twos kind of cancel. So it's -1 plus b. So when I solve this, I'll add 1 to cancel it out on both sides. And this is -3 equal to b. So I now know the correct y-intercept. So my equation will be y equals -1/2 x minus 3. Again, same slope, right? And now I know the y-intercept after doing the math was -3. So I got the correct y-intercept. So there's only one correct answer for these problems. You have to have the correct y-intercept number. It's not like the first 4 that we did where we could just make up whatever y-intercept we wanted as long as it was different. This one has to be very specific because it's going through a specific point. So let's do one more time. Parallel to this line, y equals -2x plus 3, and it's going through the point -2, -2. Okay, so remember our slope will have our equation will have the same slope, so it'll still be a -2x, but what is my y-intercept? That's the question. So I have this x, I have this y, we're going to plug those in. So -2 for the y, -2 for the x, lots of -2's here, and then solving for my y-intercept. So when I do the math, -2 equal 2. Okay, -2 times -2 is +4. Have that plus b. When I solve, I'll subtract 4 to cancel it out. And this is going to become -6 equal to b. So now I know the correct y-intercept is -6. So my final answer will be y equals -2x, because remember, same slope as the original. And then my y-intercept is -6, so -6. So correct slope, correct y-intercept, and we have our solutions. Now we're going to move towards perpendicular lines. It's the exact same thing, but with the added benefit of the opposite reciprocal thing that we talked about earlier. That's going to be very important here. So that's why it's a slight level up over this. So let's start with the basics. Write an equation. All right, that is perpendicular perpendicular, there you go, to the given. Okay, so here's my example. So A, again, this is not through a specific point. I just want a general equation that's perpendicular to the one I'm going to write. So let's start with y equals 2/3 x plus 5. So I just want any perpendicular line. It doesn't have to be a specific perpendicular line, kind of like these first 4 up here. Remember when we just wrote parallel lines? Just wanted them parallel. Didn't matter which parallel, just any parallel. So here I want to just write any perpendicular line. Now, perpendicular lines, remember, have opposite reciprocal slopes. So you'll notice that the slope of the original line is 2/3. The opposite reciprocal of that will be a negative, and then flip the fraction, 3/2. So this will be the slope of my new line. So y equals -3/2 x, and then I can write whatever y-intercept I want. It can even be the same y-intercept if you want. So you can write +5. That's fine. It doesn't have to be a different y-intercept here because it's not going to be the same line because it has a different slope. So the fact that the slope's already different, right? 2/3, -3/2 indicates it's already a different line. But we'll change the y-intercept anyway. We'll say the y-intercept is +4. Why not? But the main thing here is knowing that perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. So the slope isn't going to be 2/3 anymore because it would be parallel if it was still 2/3. Perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes, so we're going to have to change the slope on all of these. So let's try another example. B. Let's try y equals -2x plus 7. Okay, so opposite reciprocal slopes, remember. So my original slope is -2. The opposite reciprocal of that will be a positive. Remember, -2/1. Positive, and then flip the fraction, 1/2. So my slope of my perpendicular line will have a positive 1/2 slope. So 1/2 x, and then again, come up with any y-intercept for now. It doesn't matter for these problems. So we'll say +2 or something, okay? Y-intercept is not important. The thing that's important is getting the slopes changed correctly. Opposite reciprocal slopes. So -2, opposite reciprocal is 1/2. So the new equation will have a slope of 1/2. You have to get that. That's the most important part on all of this. Let's try another, right? Let's try y equals, write a perpendicular line to this. Y equals -1/3 x minus 2. Okay, so opposite reciprocal slopes. So let's look at the -1/3 for a second here. And let's opposite reciprocal it. So opposite reciprocal, negative will become positive. So it's going to be a positive slope, and then flip the 1 and 3. So it'd be 3/1. Positive 3/1, which is the same thing as just a regular 3. So opposite reciprocal slope would have a regular slope, 3x, and then again, make up any y-intercept for now. So we'll say +8. Doesn't really matter. But main thing is slopes. That's the key. Okay? Opposite reciprocal slopes. We'll do one more. Test your knowledge. Y equals 3x minus 6. So remember, opposite reciprocal slopes. The slope here is 3. Or think of it like 3/1. Opposite reciprocal of that. So positive will now make this a negative slope, and then flip the fraction. Put a 1/3. So -1/3. Pretty much is opposite of what we saw in problem C. So -1/3 x. And then we'll say +5 or something, right? Opposite reciprocal slopes, though. Again, that's the most important part. Now let's add one more step of difficulty to end the video off with. Okay, write an equation perpendicular to the given and goes through the given point. So now what matters is not only do we get the correct slope, we have to make sure we do the opposite reciprocal slope. We also have to make sure we put the correct y-intercept. Here we were just putting any y-intercept we wanted because it really didn't matter, right? We were just writing any perpendicular line. But now I want a perpendicular line that goes through a specific point, so it has to be a very specific y-intercept for this very specific perpendicular line. So we're going to start with the first one. Our equation is y equals 1/2 x minus 3, and the point that we need to go through is 3, -4. So it's very similar to what we did with the parallel lines, but we have to pay attention to our slope. So remember, opposite reciprocal comes first. So because our slope is 1/2 to start with, our slope of our new line, our perpendicular line, will have an opposite reciprocal slope to that. So it'll become, since it's positive 1/2, our new slope will be negative, and then flip the fraction, be 2/1, which is the same as just -2. So our slope will be -2 for this equation. But I don't know what my y-intercept is. I don't know what the correct y-intercept is. So I'm going to do what we did before. I'm going to plug in the x, plug in the y, and solve for the correct y-intercept. So I'm going to plug -4 in for the y. I'm going to plug 3 in for the x, and then I'm going to find b. So there's a lot going on here, right? First thing we had to do is find out what the slope of our line would be. And that's simple. If you remember, you have to do opposite reciprocal. So we know the slope of the given line was 1/2. So we went and found the opposite reciprocal of 1/2, which was -2. So that's how I found out that my new slope of my new equation would be -2. But to write the exact equation, I need to know what the correct y-intercept is. I can't just guess or put a random number. So I'm plugging in the x and the y of the point that it gave me, right? Plugged in the y, plugged in the x, and again, I still have that slope that I found is -2 here. Now I'm going to solve for the correct value of b and have the correct y-intercept. So when I solve this, it's going to be -4 equal to -2 times 3 is -6 plus b. So when I solve this, we'll add 6 to both sides, and this becomes 2. 2 is equal to b. So the correct y-intercept is 2. So my equation, my final answer should be y equals -2x, because remember that was the slope, the perpendicular slope that I needed, and then plus 2, because the correct y-intercept is 2. Okay, so that's the correct final answer. All right, let's try it again. Let's try example B. So B, our equation is y equals -3x plus 1, and it has to go through the point 6, -7. All right, so opposite reciprocal slopes again. So my perpendicular line will have an opposite reciprocal slope. So let's start with that. So our original slope was -3. The opposite reciprocal to that would be, remember it's -3/1. So it's going to be positive and then flip the fraction, 1/3. So it'll be a positive 1/3. My new slope will be a positive 1/3. But what will be the correct y-intercept? What is the correct b value? Remember, in order to find that out, we have to plug in the x and the y it gives us. So let's do that. We'll plug in the -7 for the y. We'll plug in the 6 for the x, and we'll solve. So 1/3 times 6 is 2, because 3 goes into 6 twice. So this will be 2x. Oh, not 2x, just 2. So -7 equals 2 plus b. So we'll subtract 2 to cancel it out. And this is going to be -9. So b is equal to -9. So then we know the slope is 1/3. We know that b is -9. So my final answer is y equals 1/3 x minus 9. All right, 2 more. All right, example C, y equals 2/3 x plus 4, and the point it needs to go through is 4, -2. Okay, so remember, our equation will have opposite reciprocal slopes, so opposite reciprocal of 2/3. So 2/3 opposite reciprocal. So since it's positive, the new number will be negative, and then flip the fraction, so 2/3 will become now 3/2. So our new slope will be -3/2. And now, what's the correct y-intercept? That's the question. What's the b value supposed to be? So remember, plug in the x, plug in the y, and then we'll solve for b. So we're going to plug the -2 in for the y. We know that the slope is -3/2. We're going to plug 4 in for the x, and then figure out what b is. So when I solve this, so -3/2 times 4. So that's going to be -6. All right. Bring down that b. Let's add the 6 to cancel it out. So plus 6 plus 6. This is going to be 4 is equal to b. So now I know the correct y-intercept. So my slope, remember, was -3/2. My y-intercept is 4, so it's y equals -3/2x plus 4. That's my final answer. And then let's do one more. If you want to try and pause the video, see if you can do this. If you can do this, then you're on the right track. If you can't do this, I'd recommend going back and watching this a little bit more. because you need to be able to know this stuff. All right, so 3x minus 6. Okay, and the point it needs to go through is 5, 9. Oops. So perpendicular line that goes through 5, 9. So if you want to pause it, go ahead and try it. I would encourage it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and work it out if you're ready. So remember, opposite reciprocal comes first. So 3 is our current slope, or you can think of it as 3 over 1. Opposite reciprocal will be a negative, and then flip it over, 1 over 3. So our new slope would be a negative 1/3. But what will the correct y-intercept be? Remember, plug in the x, plug in the y. So we're going to plug the 9 in for the y. We're going to plug the 5 in for the x. I feel like I did something wrong there. I think it's supposed to be a 6. Oh, well, I told you to pause it, so we'll do it this way. I think our answer will be a fraction, but it's okay. So maybe not the best one to try and do on your own. All right, so let's see here. This would be 9 equals to negative 5/3 plus b, which if you want to, all right, so let's see here. Really should have made that a 6 instead. I think that was a mistake on my part. That was supposed to be a 6. All right, let's start over. Okay. I can do it with a decimal, but I just don't want to have a decimal answer, especially, this early on trying to learn it. So let's say it was 6, 9. Okay, there we go. Pause video, start over. Good luck. All right, welcome back. Here we go. So our opposite reciprocal slope, as we've already mentioned, is still going to be the same thing. It's still going to be negative 1/3. So negative 1/3 x plus b. What is b? Oh, I don't know. Let's plug in the x and let's plug in the y. So 9 is equal to negative 1/3 times 6 plus b. Okay, let's do the math. 9 equals negative 1/3 times 6. It's going to be negative 2. So we'll add the 2 to cancel it out. It's going to be 11. So our correct value of b is 11. So we have the correct slope is negative 1/3. We have the correct y-intercept is b. So our answer should be y is equal to negative 1/3 x plus 11. There you go. All right, pretty long video, I'm sure, but it covers a lot. So if you guys have questions, let me know. I'll see you guys in class later.